My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a commander in the United States Navy SEALs. Right now, I'm sitting at a table so far from the action that the waitstaff keeps mistaking me for lost catering help. The crystal glasses catch the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grandview Country Club. Chesapeake Bay stretches endlessly beyond the terrace, its waters painted gold by the Virginia sun. The sound of perfectly orchestrated laughter drifts across the reception hall like expensive perfume. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Table 15. That's where they put me. Not table 1 with the family. Not even table 8 with the distant cousins. Table 15. Tucked behind a decorative pillar near the service entrance, where the busboys emerge with their silver trays and disappearing smile. The place card reads simply S. Mitchell in elegant script. No rank, no title, just initials, as if my full name might somehow contaminate their perfect afternoon. The bride, my sister Jessica, glides across the dance floor in her $1,000 gown, every movement calculated for the photographer's lens. Her new husband David spins her gracefully, his Naval Academy ring catching the light. Ironic, real. Here's a man who spent 4 years learning about honor and duty, now married into a family that wouldn't recognize either if it saluted them. I adjust the simple navy dress I chose for today. Not my dress blues. Not the uniform that carries the weight of 3 Purple Hearts and a navy cross. They specifically requested I not wear it. It might draw attention away from Jessica, my mother Linda had said during our brief phone conversation 2 weeks ago. You understand, don't you, dear? It's her special day. What I understood was that my service, my sacrifices, my very identity was still too much for them to handle. Too complicated. Too inconvenient for their narrative of who I was supposed to be. The memory surfaces without invitation. I was 17 when I announced I was joining the Navy. The family dinner that followed felt like a tribunal. Women don't belong in combat, my Uncle Robert had declared, cutting his steak with unnecessary force, especially not our women. What will people think? My mother had dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. We had such hopes for you, Sarah. College, a nice career, a family of your own. Why do you have to be so difficult? Even then, sitting at their pristine dining table surrounded by china that cost more than most people's cars, I knew I was choosing a path that would take me away from them. What I didn't know was how far away. What I didn't know was that distance in the end would become my salvation. The officiant's voice had carried clearly across the terrace during the ceremony. Do you, Jessica Marie Mitchell, take David Michael Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? The words were traditional, safe, approved by generations of expectation. I watched from my assigned seat in the back row, far enough away that I needed to strain to see Jessica's face as she said yes. There had been no mention of honor. No mention of service. No acknowledgement that the groom's own military service existed. Let alone that his new sister-in-law had spent the last 16 years defending the very freedom that allowed them to have their perfect wedding in the first place. Now, 3 hours into the reception, I've perfected the art of invisible attendance. I smile when appropriate. I applaud when expected. I've mastered the skill of being present without being seen. A talent that served me well during reconnaissance missions in places where being noticed meant death. The cocktail hour had been particularly brutal. Relatives and family friends approached with that special brand of polite curiosity reserved for the family disappointment. So, Sarah, they would begin. Voices pitched just loud enough to seem friendly, just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Still in the Navy, as if my career was a phase I might have outgrown. Like teenage rebellion or an unfortunate haircut. Miss Patricia Walsh, a neighbor who had known me since childhood, had been the most direct. I always wondered what would happen to you, she'd said, sipping her champagne with practiced elegance. You were such a headstrong child. I suppose the military gave you structure. She paused, her eyes scanning my civilian attire with barely concealed disappointment. Though I did hope you'd settle down by now, find a nice man, start a family. It's not too late, you know. I had smiled and nodded, the same response I'd perfected over years of similar conversation. What could I tell her? That I'd found my calling leading teams into hostile territory, that I'd saved lives, protected assets, completed missions that would never make the evening news, that the structure she mentioned had forged me into someone who could make life or death decisions in split seconds, while maintaining the composure to sit through her casual dismissal of everything I'd accomplished. The receiving line after the ceremony had been its own special torture. Jessica, radiant in her designer gown, had embraced distant relatives with more warmth than she'd shown me in years. When my turn came, she'd offered a brief hug, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she'd said, the same words she'd used for every other guest. No acknowledgement that I'd flown cross-country from my base in Virginia Beach. No recognition that this was the first family gathering I'd attended in 3 years. David, to his credit, had seemed genuinely pleased to see me. His handshake was firm, his smile authentic. "Commander Mitchell," he'd said quietly, using my rank even though no one else would. "Jessica's told me so much about you." I wondered what exactly she'd said, but his tone suggested respect rather than the carefully neutral politeness I'd grown accustomed to from my family. The reception hall itself is a monument to careful taste and unlimited budget. Fresh white roses cascade from crystal vases on every table. The band plays jazz standards that provide the perfect backdrop for conversation without overwhelming it. Everything is coordinated, controlled, perfect. Even the guests seem curated. A careful selection of successful professionals, society figures, and acceptable relatives. I recognize some faces from childhood memories. Cousin Amanda, now a successful attorney in Richmond, who waves from across the room but makes no effort to approach. My Aunt Carol, who spent the cocktail hour discussing her daughter's admission to medical school with anyone who would listen. Uncle Robert, who had cornered me briefly near the bar to ask if I was still playing soldier before moving on to more interesting conversation. The irony isn't lost on me. Here I sit, surrounded by family, more alone than I've ever been during solo missions in hostile territory. At least in Somalia or Afghanistan, I knew who the enemy was. Here, the hostility is wrapped in silk and served with champagne, making it somehow more corrosive than honest bullets. My phone buzzes quietly against my purse. A text from Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres, my closest friend and teammate. "How's the family reunion, Commander?" Followed by a laughing emoji and a salute. Mike knows the history. He's the one who found me on the base gym floor 2 years ago, after I'd received the news that my father had passed away, and the family had decided I shouldn't speak at the funeral. "Too emotional," my mother had explained. "You know how you get." Mike had helped me work through the anger that night, spotting me through set after set of punishing workouts, until exhaustion replaced rage. "Their loss," he'd said simply as we'd cooled down. "They don't deserve you." It was the kind of straightforward honesty that makes him an exceptional teammate, and an even better friend. I type back quickly, surviving. "Tell me you have something better planned for tonight." His response comes immediately: "Beach volleyball and be much more civilized than your current situation." The brief exchange grounds me, reminds me that I have chosen family waiting for me back at base. People who understand what honor actually means. The band transitions into something softer, and couples begin moving toward the dance floor. Jessica and David take center stage, moving together with the easy grace of people who belong in each other's arms. For a moment, watching them, I feel something that might be happiness for my sister. Despite everything between us, despite the years of careful distance and calculated slights, she looks genuinely radiant. That feeling fades quickly as I notice my mother directing the photographer, ensuring every angle captures Jessica's best side. Linda Mitchell has always been a master orchestrator, conducting family events like symphony performances where every note must be perfect. She catches my eye across the room and offers a brief smile before turning her attention back to more important matters. The thing about being deliberately overlooked is that it provides an excellent vantage point for observation. From my position near the service entrance, I can watch the entire event unfold with tactical clarity. I see the whispered conversations between relatives, the carefully managed interactions between different social groups, the subtle hierarchy that governs who gets attention and who gets ignored. I also see him, Admiral Thomas Reed, retired, standing near the bar with the confident posture of a man accustomed to command. He's older now, his hair completely silver, but I would recognize that bearing any. The last time I saw him was 4 years ago during the ceremony where he pinned my Navy Cross to my dress blues. He had looked me in the eye that day and said, "Your country is proud of you, Commander Mitchell. Your actions saved American lives." He hasn't noticed me yet, or if he has, he's chosen not to acknowledge it. I don't blame him. This is a social event, not a military gathering. There's no reason for him to remember one ceremony among hundreds he's presided over during his distinguished career. The thought occurs to me that I could simply leave, slip out through the service entrance, drive back to my hotel, catch an early flight back to Virginia Beach, resume my real life among people who value what I do, rather than endure another few hours of polite tolerance from people who share my DNA, but not my values. But something keeps me in my seat. Maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's the hope that something might change, that someone might finally see beyond their carefully constructed narrative of who I'm supposed to be. Or maybe it's simply the knowledge that leaving would give them exactly what they want. My absence without the inconvenience of having to explain why. The appetizer course arrives at table 15, herb-crusted salmon with microgreens, and some sort of citrus reduction that probably costs more than most people spend on groceries in a week. The couple sharing my table, friends of David's from his civilian job, make polite conversation about their recent vacation to Tuscany. They're nice enough people, the kind who ask genuine questions and listen to the answer. When they learn I'm in the Navy, their interest seems authentic rather than obligatory. That must be incredibly challenging, the woman, Margaret, says thoughtfully. I can't imagine the kind of training you must go through. Her husband nods in agreement. We have so much respect for people in the military. Our nephew is in the army, stationed in South Korea. It's a different world entirely. Their genuine interest feels like cold water after walking through the desert. For a few minutes I find myself talking about aspects of my service that I can discuss publicly, the importance of teamwork, the satisfaction of completing difficult missions, the honor of serving alongside some of the finest people in the world. They listen with attention that feels foreign after hours of family interactions. You must have incredible stories, Margaret's husband says, refilling my water glass from the pitcher on our table. The places you've been, the things you've seen. I smile and give the standard response about operational security and classified information, but he seems to understand, of course, but still, it must give you a different perspective on everything. He's right about that. It does give me perspective. It makes gatherings like this feel simultaneously trivial and heartbreaking. Trivial because I've seen real problems, real suffering, real stakes. Heartbreaking because these are the people I've spent my career protecting, and they can't even be bothered to acknowledge that protection exists. The main course follows, filet mignon with roasted vegetables and some sort of wine reduction that pairs perfectly with the Cabernet they've selected. Everything is flawless, from the temperature of the meat to the arrangement on the bone, china plate. No expense has been spared to ensure Jessica's perfect day meets every expectation. I find myself thinking about the MREs I've eaten in foxholes, the cold rations consumed during multi-day operations, the shared meals with my team where the food was terrible but the company was everything. There's something to be said for eating with people who would die for you, even if the menu consists of military-grade mysteries in plastic pouches. The toasts begin during dessert. David's father speaks first, a warm tribute to the couple filled with genuine affection and hope for their future. His words carry the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. He talks about love as a choice made daily, about the importance of supporting each other's dreams, about building something lasting together. Uncle Robert follows with a more traditional toast, heavy on humor and light on substance. He tells embarrassing stories about Jessica's childhood, draws polite laughter from the crowd, and manages to avoid mentioning my existence entirely despite recounting family gatherings where I was present. It's a masterful performance of selective memory. Then my mother rises, champagne flute in hand, her silver hair perfectly styled for the occasion. Linda Mitchell has always been beautiful in that effortless way that comes from good genetics and expensive maintenance. Tonight, in her designer dress and carefully applied makeup, she looks like the society matron she's always aspired to be. "My daughter Jessica," she begins, her voice carrying easily across the reception hall, "has always been the light of our family. From the time she was a little girl, she knew exactly what she wanted from life." The crowd settles into attentive silence, prepared for the kind of emotional tribute mothers are expected to deliver. She wanted a career that would make a difference, a man who would love and respect her, and a family that would support her dreams. Today, watching her marry David, I can see that she's achieved everything she set out to accomplish. The words are carefully chosen, perfectly delivered, and completely devoid of any acknowledgement that Jessica has a sister. My mother continues, her tone warm and inclusive as she addresses the gathered guests. Some people drift through life without direction, never quite finding their place in the world. They make choices that take them away from family, away from the values that matter most. Her eyes never find mine, but I feel the words like physical blows. But Jessica has always known where she belongs. She's chosen a path that brings honor to our family name, that makes us proud to call her our daughter. She's chosen love over adventure, stability over uncertainty, commitment over. She pauses, letting the unfinished sentence hang in the air like smoke. The applause that follows is polite and sustained, the kind of response that suggests the audience appreciated both the sentiment and the subtle artistry of what they've just witnessed. I remain seated, my hands folded in my lap, my expression carefully neutral. Years of military training have taught me to maintain composure under fire, and this is just another kind of combat. But as the clapping fades and my mother returns to her seat with a satisfied smile, I realize something has shifted inside me. The hurt is still there, the disappointment, the familiar ache of being deliberately erased from my own family's narrative. But underneath those feelings, something harder has crystallized, a clarity that cuts through years of hoping things might change, of believing that somehow I might earn their acceptance. They don't want me to be part of their story, they never. And maybe, just maybe, it's time I stopped wanting to be included in something that was never meant to hold me. The dessert course arrives as the band strikes up something cheerful and danceable. Chocolate soufflé with gold leaf and raspberry coulis, because apparently, even the dessert needs to make a statement about taste and refinement. Around me, couples begin moving toward the dance floor, ready to continue celebrating Jessica and David's perfect beginning. I take a small bite of the soufflé, rich and expertly prepared, and watch the festivities continue around me. In a few hours, this will all be over. The guests will disperse to their cars and hotels, the flowers will be packed away, the memories will begin their transformation into family lore, and I will return to my real life, among people who measure worth by actions rather than expectations. The moment Admiral Reed stood up, everything in the reception hall seemed to pause. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they softened, the way voices naturally do when someone with undeniable authority enters a room. He moved with the deliberate pace of a man who had never needed to hurry to command attention, his silver hair catching the late afternoon light streaming through the bay window. I watched from table 15 as he approached the microphone, his dress blue uniform immaculate despite the humid Virginia afternoon. Every ribbon, every pin, every detail spoke of decades of distinguished service, the kind of service that shapes nations rather than just individual careers. Even the civilian guests seemed to sense something significant was about to happen, though I doubt any of them could have predicted what was coming. He adjusted the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had delivered countless speeches to audiences ranging from graduating midshipmen to foreign dignitaries. His voice, when it came, carried the authority of waves against stone, steady, powerful, impossible to ignore. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Reed began, his words cutting through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and scattered conversations. "I hope you'll indulge an old sailor for a moment. There's something I need to share before this beautiful evening continues." The reception hall settled into complete quiet. Even the servers stopped their efficient movement between tables, sensing the gravity in his tone. Jessica and David, still on the dance floor, moved closer to hear what was coming. My mother's face showed polite curiosity, mixed with the slight tension that comes when someone else takes control of your carefully orchestrated event. 4 years ago, the Admiral continued, his eyes scanning the crowd with the measured attention of a commander addressing his fleet, I had the honor of presiding over one of the most significant ceremonies of my career. Not because of the rank involved or the location, or the dignitaries present, but because of what the recipient had done to earn that honor. I felt my stomach tighten, though I couldn't yet imagine where this was heading. There were hundreds of ceremonies, thousands of service members who had crossed paths with Admiral Reed during his distinguished career. The odds that he was referring to anything connected to me seemed impossibly small. The mission was classified then, and much of it remains classified now, he said, his voice carrying across the reception hall with crystal clarity. But what I can tell you is this: in Somalia, 4 years ago, a team of American hostages was being held in a compound that intelligence suggested was about to be moved to a location where rescue would be impossible. The details hit me like cold water. Somalia, 4 years ago. The mission that earned me my Navy Cross and 3 months in a military hospital, the mission my family knew about only through carefully worded press releases that mentioned no names and revealed no operational detail. The rescue operation required someone to infiltrate the compound alone, neutralize the sentries, and secure the hostages until the full team could extract them. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable assessment, the kind of assignment that separates heroes from everyone else. My hands found each other in my lap, gripping tightly enough that my knuckles went white. Around the reception hall, I could see faces turning, searching for whoever might be connected to this unexpected narrative. My mother's expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching concern, though she still had no idea where this was leading. The volunteer for this mission was a Navy SEAL commander who had already completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. Someone who had never failed to complete an assigned objective, no matter the personal cost. Admiral Reed paused, his eyes moving methodically across the crowd until they found me. That commander spent 6 hours inside an enemy compound, moving through hostile territory with no backup, no communication, and no guarantee of extraction. When the compound was finally secured, we found 8 American hostages alive and unharmed, and a trail of neutralized threats that could only have been accomplished by someone with extraordinary skill and unwavering dedication. The silence in the reception hall had become absolute. Not a glass clinked, not a chair scraped, not a breath seemed to disturb the air. I could feel eyes turning in my direction, though peripheral vision was all I trusted myself with at that moment. During the extraction, this commander was severely wounded. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device, designed specifically to target anyone attempting to rescue the hostages. The injuries were life-threatening. The blood loss was extreme.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But this commander maintained operational effectiveness until every hostage was safely evacuated. Admiral Reed's voice carried no emotion, just the steady recitation of facts that carried their own devastating weight. I had the honor of pinning the Navy Cross to this commander's dress blues, while she was still recovering from her injuries. It was one of the proudest moments of my 40-year career. The pronoun hit the room like a physical force. The whispered conversations that followed were brief and quickly suppressed, but I caught fragments. Did he say she? A woman? Which woman? Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Reed said, his voice rising slightly as he prepared for his conclusion. I want you to meet someone who embodies everything we hope for in American military service, someone who has placed the lives of others above her own safety repeatedly, without hesitation, without recognition, without expectation of reward. He turned toward table 15, his gaze finding mine across the crowded reception hall. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the weight of genuine respect from someone whose opinion mattered more than family approval ever could. Commander Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, would you please stand? The request landed like artillery fire in the pristine atmosphere of Jessica's perfect wedding reception. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. couldn't process the fact that my carefully maintained invisibility had just been obliterated by an admiral's recognition. Then training took over. Military bearing. Muscle memory. The automatic response to a superior officer's request. I stood slowly, my movements controlled despite the chaos in my chest, and faced the room that had spent hours pretending I didn't exist. The silence stretched as hundreds of eyes found me, standing alone near the service entrance in my simple navy dress. No uniform, no ribbons, no visible indication of the person Admiral Reed had just described. Just Sarah Mitchell, the family disappointment, suddenly illuminated by truth. And then Admiral Reed did something I will never forget. As long as I live, he raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect salute, not a casual gesture, not a token acknowledgement, a full military salute, held with the precision that only comes from decades of service, offered to a fellow warrior in front of an audience that had never seen me as anything more than a failed daughter and wayward sister. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, "it has been my honor to serve alongside you." The impact was immediate and devastating. Like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, every person in military dress in that reception hall stood and followed Admiral Reed's lead. David, despite being the groom at his own wedding, snapped to attention and saluted. 3 of his groomsmen, all Naval Academy graduates, rose from their seats and added their salutes to the growing tribute. Then came the veteran men and women I hadn't even noticed during the cocktail hour, wearing their service lapel pins with quiet pride, stood and saluted, some with the crisp precision of recent service, others with the careful movements of age and old injuries, but all with the unmistakable respect that one warrior offers another. The civilians in the crowd watched in stunned confusion, unsure whether to stand, whether to clap, whether to do anything at all. But the military members knew exactly what was happening. They were witnessing something rare and powerful, the recognition of genuine heroism by those qualified to judge it. I stood perfectly still through it all, my own hands at my sides, my face composed despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Years of training had taught me how to accept formation inspections, formal reviews, ceremonial presentations, but nothing had prepared me for this moment, when my service was finally acknowledged in front of the people who had spent years pretending it didn't matter. My mother's face had gone completely white, her champagne flute trembled in her hand as she stared at the tableau before her, her forgotten daughter receiving honors she had never bothered to understand from people whose respect actually meant something. Jessica stood frozen on the dance floor, her perfect wedding reception transformed into something she had never anticipated and couldn't control. The salutes held for what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute. Then, with the same coordinated precision with which they had begun, they ended. Admiral Reed lowered his hand, and the others followed suit. The hall remained silent for another moment, as if everyone needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Finally, Admiral Reed spoke again, his voice gentler now, but no less commanding. "Thank you, Commander. And thank you all for allowing me to share this moment. Sometimes the heroes among us go unrecognized for too long." He stepped away from the microphone, his duty complete, and returned to his position near the bar. The applause that followed started slowly, uncertain, then built into something approaching thunder. Not everyone was clapping, some remained too shocked to respond, but enough hands came together to fill the reception hall with sound that felt different from the polite appreciation that had greeted previous toasts. I remained standing through it all, accepting the recognition with the same composed dignity I had maintained through years of dismissal. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The narrative my family had constructed, the story in which I was the rebellious daughter who had chosen poorly and disappointed everyone, had just been publicly demolished by someone whose authority none of them could question. When the applause finally faded, I sat back down at table 15, my movements careful and controlled. The couple sharing my table looked at me with expressions of awe and apology, as if they needed to somehow make amends for not recognizing who I was earlier. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, her eyes bright with emotion. "My God," she whispered, "we had no idea. Thank you for your service." Her husband nodded emphatically, his own voice thick with feeling. Commander, it's an honor to share this table with you. A real honor. Around the reception hall, I could see conversations resuming, but they were different now, subdued, thoughtful. People were looking at me with new eyes, reassessing everything they thought they knew about the Mitchell family dynamic. The relatives who had spent the cocktail hour offering condescending sympathy for my choices were now avoiding eye contact entirely. The band, uncertain how to follow such an unexpected interlude, struck up something soft and instrumental. Couples slowly returned to the dance floor, but the energy had fundamentally changed. Jessica's perfect wedding reception had become something else entirely, a moment of truth that would be remembered long after the flowers wilted in the photograph's fade. I sat quietly at table 15, my hands folded in my lap, and watched my family struggle to process what had just happened. The daughter they had written off as a disappointment had just been publicly honored by a man whose opinion carried more weight than all their social approval combined. And for the first time in my adult life, I realized I didn't need their acceptance anymore. Admiral Reed's salute had given me something far more valuable, the confirmation that my worth had never depended on their recognition in the first place. The minutes following Admiral Reed's salute felt suspended in amber. Time moved differently when the foundation of everything you thought you knew suddenly shifts beneath your feet. I could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, some curious, some respectful, others calculating how to adjust their previous assumptions about the quiet woman at table 15. My phone vibrated against my purse with incoming message. Word travels fast in military circles, and apparently someone had already shared what happened with people back at base. Chief Torres had sent a string of flag emojis, followed by "Huya, Commander. Wish I could have seen their face." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, from my unit, added, "About damn time, someone said it. Proud to serve with you, ma'am." But it wasn't the messages from my teammates that caught my attention. It was the silence from the people who mattered most to the narrative I'd been living. My mother remained seated at the head table, her posture rigid, her champagne untouched. Jessica had resumed dancing with David, but her movements seemed mechanical now, as if she was going through the motions while her mind processed something she hadn't expected to face today. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Where conversations had previously flowed with the easy rhythm of social obligation, now there were pockets of hushed discussion and meaningful glances. I caught fragments of whispered exchanges. "Did you know, Samolia? My God, no wonder she carries herself that way." Mrs. Walsh, the neighbor who had earlier expressed hope that I might settle down, approached my table with obvious reluctance. Her face carried the particular expression people wear when they realize they've misjudged someone badly and need to perform damage control. "Sarah, dear," she began, her voice pitched with artificial warmth, "I had no idea about your accomplishment. If I had known, well, of course I would have." She trailed off, apparently realizing there was no graceful way to complete that sentence. I offered her the same polite smile I'd been using all afternoon. "It's quite all right, Mrs. Walsh. Most people don't know the specifics of what we do." "That's rather the point." She nodded eagerly, seizing on the explanation like a lifeline. Of course. Operational security, I imagine. Still, your parents must be so proud. Such an honor for the family." The irony of her words hung in the air between us. She glanced toward the head table where my mother sat in obvious discomfort, then back to me with growing uncertainty. Even someone as socially obtuse as Patricia Walsh could sense that something fundamental was wrong with the family dynamic she was witnessing. "They are," I said simply, offering her an easy exit from an increasingly awkward conversation. "If you'll excuse me, I think I need some air." I rose from table 15 and moved toward the terrace doors, grateful for the opportunity to escape the fishbowl atmosphere that had developed inside the reception hall. The late afternoon breeze off Chesapeake Bay carried the salt scent of home and the distant sound of gulls wheeling over the water. The terrace was largely empty, most guests preferring the air-conditioned comfort of the reception hall to the humid Virginia afternoon. I found a spot near the stone railing where I could watch the water and think through what had just happened. Admiral Reed's intervention had accomplished something I'd never expected. It had forced my family to confront the reality of who I actually was, rather than who they wanted me to be. Commander Mitchell? I turned to find David approaching, his formal jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened against the heat. Up close he looked younger than his 28 years, but his bearing carried the unmistakable confidence that comes from Naval Academy training. His expression was earnest, almost apologetic. "I wanted to thank you," he said, stopping a respectful distance away, "for your service obviously, but also for coming today. I know it wasn't easy." His acknowledgement surprised me. I'd expected polite distance, perhaps even resentment, that his wedding reception had been overshadowed by unexpected military honors. Instead, he seemed genuinely moved by what had transpired. "It's your wedding day," I replied. "I should be thanking you for including." David's laugh was short and humorless. "Including you, Sarah? They put you at table 15, behind a pillar." I saw the seating chart. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. I tried to say something to Jessica about it, but she insisted it was just how things worked out with the numbers. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us had expected to build. Here was my new brother-in-law, on what should have been the happiest day of his life, acknowledging the deliberate slight I'd been pretending not to notice. "Family dynamics are complicated," I said, offering him the same diplomatic non-answer I'd perfected over years of awkward situations. "Bullshit," David said, with surprising vehemence. "I may not know the details of your mission in Somalia, but I know what a Navy Cross represents. I know what it takes to earn one, and I know that anyone who's done what you've done deserves better from their family than being hidden at the worst table in the venue." His anger on my behalf was unexpected, and oddly touching. David barely knew me, but his military training had given him a framework for understanding worth that transcended family politics. In his world, actions mattered more than expectations, and service earned respect regardless of personal relationship. "Your wife is beautiful," I said, changing the subject before the conversation could become more complicated than either of us was prepared to handle. "She looks happy." David's expression softened as his gaze found Jessica through the terrace doors. "She is beautiful, and she is happy, most of the time, but she's also," he paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing, "she's been shaped by expectations that don't always leave room for understanding people who make different choices." It was the most tactful way I'd ever heard someone describe my sister's particular brand of narrow-mindedness. David clearly loved Jessica, but he wasn't blind to her limitations. The realization that he saw the family dynamics clearly made me like him considerably more than I'd expected. "The Admiral," David continued, "he really caught everyone off guard. I've never seen anything like that at a wedding reception." He paused, studying my face. "How do you know him?" "He presided over the ceremony when I received the Navy Cross," I explained, 4 years ago at the Pentagon. "I didn't expect him to remember me, let alone." I gestured vaguely toward the reception hall where the evidence of his public recognition still echoed. "Men like Admiral Reed don't forget acts of genuine heroism," David said with certainty, "and they don't let them go unacknowledged when the opportunity arises." He straightened slightly, his posture shifting into something more formal. "For what it's worth, Commander, I'm honored to be part of your family now, even if the rest of them don't seem to understand what that means." Before I could respond, Jessica appeared in the terrace doorway, her wedding dress rustling against the doorframe. Her expression was carefully controlled, but I could see tension in the set of her shoulders and the way her hands gripped her bouquet. "David, honey," she said, her voice pitched with artificial lightness, "people are asking where you went. Your father wants to do the father-son dance before the evening gets too late." David nodded, but his eyes remained on me. "Of course, Sarah. I hope we can talk more soon. Maybe when things are less." He searched for the right word. "Complicated," I finished for him. "Exactly." He squeezed my shoulder briefly, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes about the kind of man my sister had chosen to marry. "Congratulations again on your service, Command, and thank you." As David headed back inside, Jessica lingered on the terrace. The late afternoon sun caught the beading on her dress, transforming her into something ethereal and untouchable. For a moment she looked like the little girl I remembered from childhood, before expectations and disappointments had built walls between us that seemed impossible to scale. "He likes you," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "He seems like a good man. You chose well." Jessica's smile was tight, controlled. "He is a good man, which is why I need to ask you something." She stepped closer, lowering her voice despite the fact that we were alone on the terrace. "What happened in there, with the Admiral? It was unexpected." It changed the whole tone of the reception. I waited, sensing there was more coming. "People are asking questions now, about you, about your service, about why we never." She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. "About why you never mentioned that your sister is a decorated war hero," I supplied, my voice level despite the growing tension in my chest. Jessica's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure. "About why we don't talk about your military career more often. It's putting Mother in an uncomfortable position." The careful phrasing was so perfectly Jessica that I almost smiled. Even now, faced with the public acknowledgement of my service, she couldn't bring herself to admit that the family had deliberately minimized my accomplishments for years. "What would you like me to do about that, Jessica?" "I was hoping," she said, her words coming faster now, "that if anyone else asks, you might just say that we prefer to keep your military service private. Family modesty, you know. We don't like to brag." The request hung in the humid air between us like a challenge. She was asking me to participate in rewriting history, to help maintain the fiction that my family's silence about my service had been respectful discretion rather than deliberate dismissal. "I see," I said quietly. "It would just be easier for everyone," Jessica continued, apparently interpreting my response as agreement. "You know how Mother gets when she feels like she's being judged, and today is supposed to be about celebration, not about complicated family dynamic." I looked at my sister, beautiful in her designer gown, surrounded by the perfect wedding she'd spent months planning, and realized that nothing had actually changed. Admiral Reed's recognition had shifted the public perception, but it hadn't touched the fundamental issue. My family was still more concerned with managing their image than acknowledging my reality. "Jessica," I said gently, "I've spent most of my adult life making it easier for everyone. I've stayed quiet about my service, downplayed my achievements, and accepted being treated like the family's embarrassing secret. I've done it because I kept hoping that someday you might actually be proud of what I've accomplished." Her expression tightened, defensiveness creeping into her voice. "We are proud of you, Sarah. We've always been proud. We just don't feel the need to make everything about military service all the time." "You put me at table 15, I said simply. The statement hit like a physical blow. Jessica's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her hands twisted around her bouquet, crushing some of the delicate petals. "The seating chart was complicated," she said finally. "There were so many considerations, so many relationships to balance. It wasn't personal. Everything about today has been personal, Jessica. From the invitation that came with instructions about not wearing my uniform, to the toast where Mother managed to talk about family values, without mentioning that one of her daughters has spent 16 years serving her country." Tears gathered in Jessica's eyes, threatening her carefully applied makeup. "You're ruining my wedding day," she whispered. The accusation stung, but it also clarified something important. In Jessica's mind, acknowledging my service was somehow destructive to her happiness. My very existence as a decorated military officer was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a source of family pride. "I'm not ruining anything," I said calmly. "I'm just refusing to pretend anymore that my service doesn't matter." Jessica stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture I recognized from childhood. It was the look she wore when she decided someone was being unreasonable and needed to be dismissed. "Fine," she said, her voice cold now. "Do whatever you want, Sarah. You always have anyway." She turned and walked back toward the reception hall, her dress trailing behind her like a silk accusation. I watched her go, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. My family would never see my service as anything other than an inconvenient complication to their preferred narrative. The terrace felt suddenly peaceful after Jessica's departure. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the bay in shades of gold and amber. In a few hours the reception would end, the guests would disperse, and I would return to my real life among people who understood what honor actually meant. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Chief Torres. I answered, grateful for the connection to someone who existed outside the strange bubble of family politics. Commander, his voice carried clearly over the connection. I just got off the phone with Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. She said, there's video of what happened making the rounds on social media. Some guest posted it. You're about to become famous. I closed my eyes, imagining the complications that were about to cascade from a viral video of Admiral Reed's unexpected recognition. How bad is it? Depends on your perspective, Mike said with obvious amusement. From where I'm sitting, it's about time the world saw what we see every day. From your family's perspective, I'm guessing it's about to get complicated. He was right, of course. The controlled environment of the wedding reception was one thing, but social media had a way of amplifying moments far beyond their original context. Tomorrow, people I'd never met would have opinions about my family dynamics based on a 30-second video clip. Any advice? I asked. Same advice I always give, Mike replied. Stay true to who you are. The people who matter already know your worth. The people who don't probably never will. After ending the call, I remained on the terrace watching the sun sink lower over the bay. The reception continued behind me, the sounds of music and conversation drifting through the open doors. Occasionally someone would glance in my direction, but for the most part, the evening was proceeding as weddings do, with toasts and dancing and the inevitable gravitational pull toward the bar. Around 8 o'clock, as the natural light began to fade and the venue's evening lighting took over, I saw Admiral Reed step onto the terrace. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never doubted his welcome anywhere, but his expression suggested he was seeking privacy rather than company. Commander, he said when he spotted me near the railing. I hope you don't mind the interruption. Not at all. It's your interruption that made this evening memorable. Admiral Reed chuckled, a sound that carried decades of experience with military understatement. I suspect it was memorable long before I opened my mouth. He joined me at the railing, his gaze following mine out over the darkening water. Beautiful view. Virginia has some spectacular coastline. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two naval officers watching the tide change in the gathering dusk. There was something profoundly peaceful about sharing space with someone who understood the weight of service without needing to discuss it. I hope I didn't overstep, Admiral Reed said eventually. I saw you sitting alone, recognized you from the ceremony 4 years ago, and realized that perhaps some recognition was overdue. You didn't overstep, sir. If anything, you said things that needed saying. He nodded thoughtfully. Family can be complicated for people in our line of work. The sacrifices we make, the risks we take, they're not always easy for civilians to understand, even the civilians we love most. His words carried the weight of personal experience. I wondered about his own family, his own navigations between duty and belonging, service and acceptance. Sometimes, I said carefully, I think they understand perfectly. They just don't approve. Admiral Reed's laugh was rueful. That may be worse than ignorance. At least ignorance can be educated. He turned to face me more directly. Can I ask you something, Commander? Of course, sir. Do you regret your service? Given the cost, given the distance it's created between you and your family, would you choose differently if you could go back? The question hung in the evening air like a challenge. It was the kind of question that demanded complete honesty. The kind that revealed everything about a person's fundamental values. No, sir, I said without hesitation. I wouldn't change anything. The missions, the deployments, the risks, even the injuries, all of it was worth it. Every hostage we brought home, every threat we neutralized, every operation that kept Americans safe, it was worth it. Even this, he gestured toward the reception hall where my family was celebrating without apparent awareness of my absence. I considered the question seriously, weighing the isolation against the certainty of purpose that had shaped my adult life. Even this, sir, because their approval was never the point. The mission was the point. The service was the point. The knowledge that somewhere, People are alive today because of what we do. That's the point. Admiral Reed smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. That's the answer of a true warrior, Commander. Your country is fortunate to have you. Thank you, sir. He straightened slightly, his posture shifting into something more formal. I have a confession to make. My presence at this wedding wasn't entirely coincidental. When I saw the guest list, I recognized your name. I've been following your career since the Somalia operation, and I wanted to see how you were doing. The admission surprised me. You've been following my career. Outstanding officers deserve attention, Commander. Your record since Somalia has been exemplary. Your team leadership, your operational success rate, your innovation in tactical planning, all of it has been noted by people who matter in our community. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. There's a position opening up at the Pentagon. Special Operations Liaison to the Joint Chiefs. It would mean a promotion to captain, a move to Washington, and significantly more influence over strategic planning. The offer hit me like a physical force. Captain, Pentagon assignment. The kind of career advancement that represented the absolute pinnacle of naval service. The kind of opportunity that officers spent entire careers hoping to achieve. The position requires someone with proven combat leadership, operational innovation, and the ability to brief senior civilian leadership on sensitive matters. Admiral Reed continued, your name is at the top of the list. I stared out over the bay, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. Captain Mitchell, Pentagon assignment, a role that would place me at the center of American military strategy. It was everything I'd never dared to dream about. What's the timeline? I asked. The position becomes available in 6 months. Formal interviews begin in 3 months. But the decision-makers are already aware of your candidacy. He studied my face. Is this something you'd be interested in pursuing? Yes, sir. Absolutely. Admiral Reed's smile broadened. I thought you might be. Consider this conversation your unofficial heads up. The formal notification will come through channels in the next few weeks. As he prepared to leave, Admiral Reed paused and looked back toward the reception hall. Commander, for what it's worth, I think your family's failure to recognize your achievements says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. The uniform doesn't make the warrior honors the uniform. After he left, I remained on the terrace as darkness settled over Chesapeake Bay. Inside, the reception was reaching its natural conclusion. Elderly relatives were beginning to gather their belongings. Young couples were settling into the rhythm of the evening's final dances, and the bride and groom were making their rounds of farewell conversations. In 6 months, I would leave Virginia Beach for Washington. Captain Mitchell, Pentagon assignment, influence over strategic decisions that would shape American military operations around the world. The career trajectory I'd never allowed myself to imagine was suddenly not just possible but probable. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the day my family had most clearly demonstrated their inability to see my worth, I'd received recognition from people whose opinions actually mattered, and learned about an opportunity that would transform my career forever. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had accumulated during my time on the terrace. Congratulations from teammates. Pride from former commanding officers, expressions of support from fellow officers around the world who had somehow learned about Admiral Reed's recognition. The military community had a way of sharing news that mattered, and apparently my moment of public validation had resonated far beyond the confines of Jessica's wedding reception. But there were no messages from my family. No text from my mother acknowledging what had happened. No calls from Jessica wanting to talk through the complications. No outreach from relatives who had witnessed something that should have changed their understanding of who I was. Their silence spoke louder than any words could have. Even now, faced with undeniable evidence of my service and its recognition by the highest levels of military leadership, they remained more concerned with managing their discomfort than acknowledging my reality. As I watched the lights of distant boats moving across the dark water, I realized that Admiral Reed had given me more than just public recognition and career advancement. He had given me perspective. The validation I'd been seeking from my family was not only unnecessary but ultimately irrelevant. My worth had never depended on their approval, and my future certainly didn't require their understanding. Tomorrow I would fly back to Virginia Beach and resume my real life among people who measured worth by actions rather than expectations. In 3 months I would begin the interview process for the most significant assignment of my career. In 6 months I would become Captain Mitchell and take on responsibilities that would impact American security around the world. And my family would continue their careful dance around the reality of who I actually was, managing their image and protecting their comfort while the daughter they'd never bothered to understand served her country with distinction on stages they'd never see. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, it felt like freedom. The morning after the wedding arrived with the particular cruelty that Virginia summers reserve for hangovers and regret. I hadn't drunk enough to warrant the pounding in my head, but I'd certainly absorbed enough emotional trauma to explain the weight pressing against my chest when I woke in my hotel room overlooking the James River. My phone showed 47 missed calls and over 200 text messages. The video of Admiral Reed's recognition had indeed gone viral, accumulating over 3 million views across various social media platforms in less than 12 hours. The comments ranged from overwhelming support to predictable trolling, but the overall sentiment seemed to be one of admiration for both the Admiral's gesture and what people perceived as my grace under fire. Several news outlets had already reached out for interviews. CNN, Fox News, even international organizations wanted to discuss what was being called the wedding salute heard round the world. A producer from 60 Minutes had left 3 voicemails, each more insistent than the last. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office had sent official guidance on media engagement, which essentially boiled down to refer all inquiries to us, but it was the message I didn't receive that cut deepest. Nothing from my mother, nothing from Jessica, nothing from any family member acknowledging what had transpired or expressing any interest in discussing the implications. Their silence felt deliberate, calculated, designed to communicate their displeasure more effectively than words ever could. I ordered room service coffee and positioned myself by the window overlooking the river. The morning light revealed joggers following the waterfront path, early commuters heading toward downtown Richmond, the normal rhythm of civilian life proceeding without awareness that one of their military protectors was sitting 6 floors above them, processing the wreckage of family relationships. The knock on my door came at precisely 9 o'clock. I wasn't expecting anyone, but military training had taught me to be prepared for the unexpected. When I opened the door, I found my mother standing in the hallway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, her expression carrying the particular blend of determination and disapproval that had characterized most of our significant conversations over the past decade. "We need to talk," Linda Mitchell said without preamble. I stepped aside to allow her entry, noting the way she surveyed my hotel room with barely concealed distaste. Everything about her posture suggested this was not a social visit or an attempt at reconciliation. This was a mission, executed with the same precision she brought to organizing charity galas and managing social obligations. "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the room service cart. "No, thank you." She settled into the room's single armchair with the careful grace of someone accustomed to being watched and evaluated. "I assume you've seen the coverage. Some of it. It's everywhere, Sarah. Every news station, every website, every social media platform. They're calling it inspirational, heartwarming, a moment of pure American patriotism." Her tone suggested these were criticisms rather than compliments. I waited, sensing there was much more coming. "Your father's business partners are calling. Our neighbors are stopping by with congratulations. The country club is buzzing with talk about our war hero daughter." She pronounced the phrase with visible distaste. "Even the ladies' auxiliary wants to invite you to speak at their next luncheon. And this is a problem because," Linda's laugh was sharp, humorless, "because it's all based on a fundamental mental sending of our family dynamics. These people think we've been hiding your military career out of modesty when the truth is far more complicated." "What is the truth, Mother?" She studied me for a long moment, her eyes calculate. "The truth is that your choices have always put this family in difficult positions. The truth is that your insistence on pursuing a military career despite our objections has created years of awkward social situations, and uncomfortable conversations. Her words landed with familiar precision. This was the narrative I'd been hearing in various forms since I was 17, the story in which my service was characterized as stubborn rebellion rather than patriotic duty. The truth is, she continued, that yesterday's spectacle has put us all in an impossible situation. Now we have to explain why we don't talk about your military service, why you weren't seated with family, why you seem so disconnected from the rest of us. You could try telling them the actual truth, I suggested. Which is what exactly? That you've never approved of my career choice, that you've spent 16 years trying to pretend my service doesn't exist, that you're more embarrassed by my achievements than proud of them. Linda's face flushed slightly, but her voice remained controlled. That's not fair, Sarah. We've always supported you, even when we disagreed with your decisions. But support doesn't mean we have to make your career the centerpiece of every family gathering. Nobody asked you to make it the centerpiece, but you've gone out of your way to erase it entirely. We've tried to maintain family harmony, she corrected. We've tried to focus on the things that bring us together rather than the things that divide us. The careful phrasing was so perfectly maternal that it almost masked the underlying cruelty. Even now, faced with public evidence of my service's significance, she was framing my military career as divisive rather than honorable. What do you want from me, Mother? Linda leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more focused. I want you to help us manage this situation. The media attention, the social complications, the questions we're going to face for months. You need to help us craft a response that protects the family's reputation while acknowledging the circumstances. You want me to help you spin them. I want you to help us move forward in a way that doesn't destroy the relationships we've spent decades building. The request hung between us like a negotiation. She was asking me to participate in damage control to help minimize the impact of my public recognition on their carefully constructed social position. Even Admiral Reed's validation couldn't penetrate their fundamental inability to see my service as anything other than a complication to be managed. What kind of response did you have in mind? Something about how we've always been proud of your service, but prefer to keep family matters private. Something about how military families often choose discretion over publicity. Something that explains the distance without making us look like we don't support our own daughter. I walked to the window, looking down at the river where morning light was beginning to burn off the overnight mist. Below, people were beginning their daily routines, unaware that 6 floors above them a mother was asking her daughter to help cover up 16 years of deliberate indifference. No, I said quietly. I'm sorry. No, I won't help you craft a response that makes my service sound like a family embarrassment we've been trying to hide. Linda's posture stiffened. Then what do you suggest? That we simply allow this narrative to continue unchallenged? That we let people believe we've been deliberately cruel to our own daughter? Maybe because you have been. The words escaped before I could stop them, carrying 16 years of accumulated frustration and disappointment. They landed in the hotel room like artillery fire, impossible to take back or soften. Linda's face went completely white. For a moment she looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility that her actions might be perceived as cruel had never occurred to her. That's not fair, she said finally, her voice smaller than before. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work? When was the last time you showed any interest in my deployments, my missions, the people I serve with? When was the last time you treated my military career as anything other than an inconvenient phase you were hoping I'd outgrow? Your career has taken you away from us, Linda replied, her tone becoming defensive. You're always deployed, always training, always unavailable for family events. You've chosen a life that makes normal family relationships impossible. I've chosen a life of service. The fact that you can't see the difference is exactly the problem. We stared at each other across the hotel room, 2 women who shared genes, but apparently little else. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated the gulf between us with painful clarity. Your father would be disappointed, Linda said finally, playing what she clearly believed was her strongest card. My father would be proud, I replied without hesitation. Dad understood duty. He understood sacrifice. He would have understood why Admiral Reed stood up yesterday, and he would have been proud that his daughter earned that kind of recognition. Linda's expression crumpled slightly. The invocation of my father's memory had touched something she hadn't expected to feel. For a moment, she looked vulnerable, confused, like someone who had lost her way in a conversation she thought she understood. "We don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do what?" "Be proud of something we don't understand. Be supportive of choices that scare us. Watch our daughter risk her life for strangers while we sit safely at home, worrying about things that don't matter." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. For the first time in our conversation, Linda sounded like a mother rather than a social strategist. "You've never tried to understand," I said gently. "You've never asked what my service means to me, why I chose it, what I get from it. You've just decided it was wrong and spent 16 years waiting for me to come to my senses. Because we love you," she said, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Because watching you choose danger over safety, sacrifice over comfort, service over family, it breaks our hearts every single day." The admission revealed the core of our 16-year conflict. They didn't disapprove of my service because they thought it was wrong. They disapproved because it terrified them. Every deployment, every mission, every risk I took was a reminder that they had raised a daughter who valued something more than her own safety, something more than their peace of mind. "I understand your fear," I said carefully, "but your love can't be conditional on my choosing safety over service. It can't be dependent on my living the life you wanted for me, instead of the life I chose for myself." Linda wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, trying to restore her composure. "So what happens now? How do we move forward from here?" "You could start by being honest. When people ask about my service, you could tell them you're proud of what I've accomplished. When they ask why you don't talk about it more, you could admit that it's because military life is difficult for families to understand, and you're still learning how to support someone whose calling is so different from your own expectations. And if we can't do that," the question carried undertones of ultimatum, as if she was testing whether I would choose family harmony over personal integrity. "Then we continue as we have been," I said simply. "You continue pretending my service doesn't matter, and I continue building my life among people who understand what honor actually means." Linda flinched at the bluntness of my response. "That sounds like you're choosing your military friends over your family." "I'm choosing honesty over pretense. I'm choosing people who celebrate my achievements over people who ask me to hide them. I'm choosing relationships built on mutual respect over relationships dependent on my willingness to minimize myself for your comfort." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of defeat that I'd never heard before. "I don't know if we can change, Sarah. This is who we are. This is how we've always handled things that don't fit our understanding of how life should work." "Then we have a problem." Linda gathered her purse and stood, her movements careful and controlled. "I suppose we do." She paused at the door, turning back one final time. "For what it's worth, I am proud of what you've accomplished. I just don't know how to show it in a way that doesn't terrify me." After she left, I sat in the hotel room's armchair and tried to process what had just transpired. The conversation had revealed more truth than we'd shared in years, but it had also confirmed my worst fears about the impossibility of bridging the gap between their expectations and my reality. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Chief Torres' name appeared on the screen, and I answered gratefully. "Morning, Commander. How are you holding up?" "Surviving, barely." I saw the news coverage. "Hell of a thing watching Admiral Reed recognize you like that. Made me proud to serve alongside you." His words carried the easy warmth of genuine respect, such a contrast to the careful calculations I'd been navigating with my family. "Any word from the team?" I asked. "Everyone's buzzing about your Pentagon opportunity. Rodriguez wants to throw you a promotion party as soon as you get back. Martinez is already placing bets on how quickly you'll outrank the rest of us." The reminder of my real life, my chosen family, felt like oxygen after holding my breath for too long. "Mike, can I ask you something? Always, do you think I'm being unfair to my family? Expecting too much, asking them to understand something they're not equipped to handle?" Chief Torres was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Commander, in my experience, families either support their military members or they don't. There's not much middle ground. The ones who get it may not understand everything about what we do, but they respect it. They're proud of it. They find ways to show that pride even when they're scared. He paused, then continued more gently. The ones who don't get it spend a lot of energy trying to make the military member feel guilty for choosing service over their comfort. They ask you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. Which category do you think my family falls into? Based on what I saw in that video and what you've told me over the years, they're asking you to be smaller, Commander, and that's not your problem to solve. His assessment was brutally honest but not unkind. Mike had a gift for cutting through complexity to reach the essential truth, and his truth was that my family's limitations were not my responsibility to manage. Thanks, Mike. I needed to hear that. Any time. When are you coming home? This afternoon. I think I've had about all the family time I can handle for one weekend. Good. The ocean's been missing you, and Rodriguez has been practicing her promotion speech for when you make captain. After ending the call, I began packing my few belongings. The hotel room had served its purpose as neutral ground for processing the wedding's aftermath, but I was ready to return to Virginia Beach, and the people who understood that service was something to be celebrated rather than managed. My phone buzzed with another call, this one from an unknown number with a Virginia area code. Commander Mitchell, this is Angela Rodriguez with the Washington Post. I was hoping to discuss yesterday's recognition ceremony and what it reveals about military families navigating civilian social expectations. I declined the interview politely but firmly, referring her to the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office as I'd been instructed, but her question lingered in my mind as I finished packing. What did yesterday's events reveal about military families navigating civilian expectations? The answer seemed obvious now. Some civilian families never learn to navigate military realities at all. They simply choose to ignore them, hoping that indifference will somehow transform their military family member into someone more convenient, more comfortable, more aligned with their preferred narrative. My family had spent 16 years waiting for me to outgrow my calling, to choose their version of success over my own sense of duty. Yesterday's recognition had forced them to confront the fact that my phase was actually a distinguished career worthy of national recognition. Their response had been to ask me to help them minimize that recognition rather than learn to celebrate it. The drive back to Virginia Beach took me through familiar countryside, past small towns where American flags hung from front porches and yellow ribbon magnets adorned pickup trucks. These were communities that understood military service instinctively, where deployment cycles shaped school calendars and homecoming celebrations drew entire neighborhoods. It occurred to me that my family lived in a bubble of privilege that insulated them from the reality of military sacrifice. They existed in social circles where military service was abstract, theoretical, something that happened to other people's children. My choice to serve had punctured that bubble, forcing them to confront realities they preferred to avoid, but their discomfort was not my responsibility. Their inability to process my choices was not my burden to bear. Admiral Reed's recognition had reminded me that my worth was measured by people who understood the weight of service, not by people who found it inconvenient. As I crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, the familiar sight of Naval Station Norfolk came into view. Ships at anchor, aircraft in formation overhead, the controlled chaos of a major military installation pursuing its mission with quiet competence. This was my world, my chosen family, my source of purpose and pride. My phone displayed dozens of new messages from teammates, fellow officers and former commanding officers who had seen the viral video and wanted to express their support. The military community had embraced Admiral Reed's gesture as validation of something they already knew, that exceptional service deserved recognition regardless of the personal cost, but there were still no messages from my family. No text from Jessica asking if we could talk through what had happened. No calls from relatives wanting to understand more about my service. No acknowledgement from anyone sharing my last name that yesterday had changed anything at all. Their continued silence spoke louder than any words could have. Even faced with undeniable evidence of my service's significance, Even witnessing the respect I commanded from the highest levels of military leadership, they remained more invested in protecting their comfort than acknowledging my reality. The realization should have been devastating instead. It felt liberating. For 16 years I had carried the hope that someday my family might see my service as something worthy of pride rather than something to be endured. Yesterday had proven that hope was both misplaced and unnecessary. I didn't need their pride. I had Admiral Reed's respect. I had my teammates' loyalty. I had the knowledge that my service had saved lives and protected freedom. I had the promise of assignment, the Pentagon, and promotion to captain, recognition from people whose opinions actually matter. Most importantly, I had the certainty that came from living according to principles larger than personal comfort, from choosing service over safety, honor over convenience. These were choices my family would never understand, but they were choices that had shaped me into someone I could respect even when others couldn't. The sun was setting over Virginia Beach as I pulled into the base, casting long shadows across the familiar landscape of my real home. Tomorrow I would resume my duties among people who measured worth by actions rather than expectations. In 3 months I would begin interviews for the most significant assignment of my career. In 6 months I would become Captain Mitchell and take on responsibilities that would shape American military strategy around the world. And my family would continue their careful dance around the reality of who I was, managing their image and protecting their comfort while the daughter they had never bothered to understand served her country with distinction on stages they would never see. The thought no longer made me sad, it made me free. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Jessica again. The silence hadn't surprised me, but the method of contact did. Instead of a phone call or text message, she sent a formal letter to my base address, delivered through standard postal service as if we were business associates rather than sisters. The envelope bore her married name in elegant script, Mrs. David Harrison. Inside, her handwriting was as controlled as everything else about her, each word carefully formed with the precision she'd learned in expensive private schools. The letter was brief, formal, and devastating in its clarity. "Sarah," it began, without warmth or familial address. "The past few weeks have been difficult for our family. The media attention from your wedding recognition has created complications we're still trying to navigate. Mother has been fielding questions from friends and colleagues about our family dynamics, and the explanations have become increasingly awkward." The clinical tone continued for 2 pages, outlining the challenges my public recognition had created for their social standing. Apparently, several of Linda's charity organizations had reached out wanting me to speak at fundraising events. The country club had inquired about featuring our family in their newsletter as an example of patriotic service. Even Jessica's new in-laws had expressed interest in learning more about my military career. "David has been wonderful," Jessica wrote, in what felt like the letter's only genuine moment. "He doesn't understand why we don't talk about your service more often, and frankly his questions are becoming difficult to answer. I find myself in the position of having to explain family decisions that suddenly seem harder to justify." The letter's conclusion was the part that would stay with me long after I'd folded it and placed it in my desk drawer. "I think it would be best if we maintained some distance while everything settles down. The media attention will fade eventually, and perhaps then we can find a way to return to normal family interactions. Until then, I believe space is what we all need to process these changes." She had signed it simply, Jessica Harrison, as if her married name could somehow erase 34 years of shared history. I read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of calculated cruelty. She wasn't asking for understanding or offering reconciliation. She was formally requesting that I remove myself from their lives until my inconvenient recognition stopped complicating their social calendar. Chief Torres found me on the beach that evening, sitting on the sand and watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore. The Atlantic stretched dark and infinite before us, its rhythm offering the kind of perspective that only comes from contemplating forces larger than human relationships. "Rough day, Commander?" he asked, settling beside me on the cool sand. I handed him Jessica's letter without comment. Mike read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. "Well," he said finally, That's about the coldest thing I've read outside of official enemy correspondence. She wants me to disappear until my recognition stops being inconvenient for them. I can see that. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I dug my fingers into the sand, feeling the fine grains slip between them like time itself. I don't know. Part of me wants to honor her request, just fade away and let them have their perfect life without military complications. Another part of me wants to fight, to force them to acknowledge what they're doing. And what does the third part want? Mike's question caught me off guard. What third part? The part that's a Navy SEAL commander who's dedicated her life to something bigger than family politics. The part that earned a Navy Cross in Somalia and is about to interview for Pentagon assignment. What does that part want? I considered his question while waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. What did want, separate from their expectations and my reactions to their limitations? That part wants to build something meaningful, I said slowly. Something that helps other military families navigate this kind of rejection, something that turns personal pain into purposeful action. Mike nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like a leader, instead of a disappointed daughter. His words clarified something that had been forming in my mind since Admiral Reed's recognition. The hurt from Jessica's letter was real, but it was also finite. The opportunity to transform that hurt into something constructive was infinite. What if we started a foundation? I asked, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. Something specifically focused on military families dealing with civilian family rejection, support groups, counseling resources, legal advocacy for service members whose families are actively undermining their career. Like your sister tried to do with that anonymous letter, the reference to Jessica's attempt to sabotage my promotion hit like cold water. I'd never told Mike about discovering the letter, but somehow he'd pieced together the truth from context and careful observation. You knew? Suspect. The timing of your promotion delay, the way your family reacted when it finally came through, the look on your sister's face when Admiral Reed mentioned your service record. Plus, you mentioned finding something that changed your perspective on family loyalty. Wasn't hard to connect the dots. Chief Torres had been watching me process family betrayal for years, reading the signs with the same tactical awareness he brought to combat situations. His insight was both comforting and unsettling. A foundation focused on military family issues could make a real difference, he continued. God knows there are plenty of service members dealing with families who can't handle their career choices. Most of them suffer in silence because they don't want to seem ungrateful or disloyal to their blood relative. The conversation continued as darkness settled over the beach, waves providing rhythmic background to our planning. By the time we walked back toward base housing, we had outlined the basic structure of what would become the Warrior Family Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting military personnel whose service created conflict with their civilian family. The next morning brought news that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my career trajectory. Admiral Reed called personally, his voice carrying an urgency I'd never heard before. Commander Mitchell, I need you to come to Washington immediately. There's been a development regarding your Pentagon assignment that requires immediate discussion. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by officers whose rank and ribbons spoke of careers at the highest levels of American military leadership. Admiral Reed sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other admirals and a Marine Corps general whose reputation preceded him into any room he entered. Commander, Admiral Reed began without preamble. Your recognition at the wedding reception has had unexpected consequences. The video has been viewed over 15 million times across all platforms. More importantly, it's generated significant political attention at the highest levels of government. He gestured toward a folder of documents that had been placed before each person at the table. The Secretary of Defense has received over 10,000 letters and emails specifically referencing your service and calling for increased recognition of special operations achievement. Several congressional committees have requested briefings on special operations effectiveness, using your Somalia mission as a case study. The implications began to settle over me like a weight I hadn't expected to carry. My family's wedding drama had somehow become a catalyst for national discussion about military recognition and civilian understanding of special operations. The position we discussed, Admiral Reed continued, has evolved significantly. Instead of Special Operations Liaison to the Joint Chiefs, you're being offered the newly created position of Director of Special Operations, Public Engagement. It's a Pentagon assignment, but with cabinet-level access and responsibility for shaping how America understands and supports its special operations forces. The Marine general leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in uniform. Commander, your recognition has created a unique opportunity to bridge the gap between military service and civilian understanding. The Secretary believes you're uniquely positioned to lead this initiative. What would the role entail? I asked, trying to process the magnitude of what they were offering. Congressional testimony on special operations effectiveness, one of the admirals replied. Media engagement to educate civilian audiences about the reality of military service. Coordination with veteran organizations to improve support systems. Development of programs to help military families navigate civilian misunderstanding. The last responsibility hit me with particular force. They were offering me the opportunity to build, at the national level, exactly what Mike and I had discussed on the beach the night before. The promotion would be immediate, Admiral Reed added. Captain, with subsequent elevation to Rear Admiral within 18 months if performance indicators are met. The assignment would be initially for 3 years, with potential extension based on program success. Rear Admiral, the rank I'd never allowed myself to imagine achieving, the kind of career pinnacle that opened doors to positions that shaped American military policy for generations. I need to ask about the political implications, I said carefully. This level of visibility, this kind of public engagement, it's going to generate attention beyond military circles. The Marine general's smile was knowing. Commander, that attention is exactly why this position exists. Your wedding recognition demonstrated something crucial. When Americans see authentic military service acknowledged authentically, they respond with overwhelming support. We need to harness that response systematically. There will be challenges, Admiral Reed acknowledged. Media scrutiny, political pressure, personal attacks from people who disagree with increased military recognition. Your family situation specifically is likely to generate continued attention. The mention of my family brought Jessica's letter back to mind with sharp clarity. She had asked for distance until the media attention faded. Instead, I was being offered a position that would ensure the attention never faded at all. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I asked. Immediate, the Marine general replied. The Secretary wants this program operational within 60 days. Your first congressional testimony is already scheduled for 6 weeks from today.
6 weeks?
In 6 weeks, I would be sitting before Congress, explaining to elected officials why America needed to better understand and support its special operations forces. I would be representing not just my own service, but the experiences of thousands of warriors whose sacrifices went unrecognized by the civilians they protected. I accept, I said without hesitation. The room erupted in subdued but genuine celebration. Handshakes. Congratulations. The kind of professional warmth that marked significant military appointments. Admiral Reed's smile carried particular satisfaction, as if he'd orchestrated something that had been years in the making. Welcome to the Pentagon, Captain Mitchell, he said, using my new rank for the first time. Your country is about to discover what we've known all along, that you're exactly the leader this mission requires. The drive back to Virginia Beach gave me time to process the magnitude of what had just transpired. In the space of 3 weeks, I'd gone from being the family disappointment hidden at table 15 to being offered one of the most significant positions in American military public engagement. The irony was almost overwhelming. Jessica's request that I disappear until the attention faded had come on the same day I'd been offered a role that would place me permanently in the national spotlight. My family's desire for distance would now be complicated by my visibility as one of the Pentagon's primary public faces, but the personal implications paled beside the professional opportunity. This wasn't just career advancement, it was the chance to build something that could transform how America understood and supported its military family. Every service member dealing with family rejection, every warrior whose sacrifices went unacknowledged, Every veteran struggling to bridge the civilian-military divide could potentially benefit from the programs I would develop. My phone rang as I crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, Jessica's name appearing on the screen for the first time since her letter arrived. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over caution. "Sarah?" Her voice carried a note of uncertainty I'd rarely heard. "I just saw the news about your Pentagon appointment. It's everywhere. Word travels fast. Is it true? Are you really going to be briefing Congress and working directly with the Secretary of Defense?" The questions carried undercurrents I couldn't quite identify. Jessica sounded simultaneously impressed and concerned, proud and worried. "It's true. My God." A long pause. "Sarah, I need to apologize for my letter. I was angry and confused and I said things that were unfair. I never imagined that your recognition would lead to something like this." Her apology was unexpected, but felt incomplete, as if she was responding to my new prominence rather than acknowledging the fundamental issues that had created our distance. "What changed, Jessica?" "David saw the news first. He was so excited, so proud to have you as a sister-in-law. He made me realize that I'd been looking at everything backwards. Instead of being embarrassed by the attention your service was getting, I should have been embarrassed by how poorly our family had handled your achievement." The admission was more honest than anything she'd said to me in years, but it also revealed the conditional nature of her evolving perspective. She was reconsidering her position because my service had gained external validation, not because she'd developed independent appreciation for what I'd accomplished. "David helped me understand that having a war hero in the family isn't a complication to be managed," she continued. "It's an honor to be celebrated. I'm sorry it took your Pentagon appointment for me to see that clearly. What about Mother?" Jessica's sigh carried the weight of complicated family dynamics. "Mother is struggling. She's proud of your appointment, but she's also terrified by the level of attention it's going to bring. You know how she is about privacy, about controlling family narratives. She'll have to adjust. This kind of position doesn't allow for family privacy." "I know. We all know." "David thinks it's wonderful that our family is about to become synonymous with military service and patriotic sacrifice. Mother is having trouble seeing it that way." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, touching on logistics and family dynamics, with a carefulness that spoke to years of accumulated hurt. Jessica's apology felt genuine but incomplete, shaped more by external recognition of my achievements than by internal evolution of her value. When we hung up, I realized that my family's response to my new position would be irrelevant to my success in it. Their approval or disapproval, their comfort or discomfort, their pride or embarrassment, would have no impact on my ability to serve America's special operations community effectively. The revelation was both liberating and sobering. For 16 years I'd carried the hope that military achievement might eventually earn family recognition. Now, facing the pinnacle of military public service, I understood that their recognition had never been necessary for my success and would never be sufficient for my satisfaction. That evening, Chief Torres and I sat on the beach again, this time planning the transition of my duties to my successor and discussing the foundation we'd outlined the night before. The Pentagon position would provide resources and authority to implement our vision at a national scale, transforming personal experience into public policy. "You know what the best part of this is?" Mike asked as waves crashed steadily before us. "What's that?" "Your family spent 16 years trying to minimize your service, and now your service is about to become one of the most visible positions in the American military. They can't hide you anymore, even if they wanted to." His observation captured something essential about the transformation that was occurring. The daughter they'd tried to keep invisible was about to become one of the most recognizable faces of American military service. The career they'd characterized as rebellious stubbornness was about to be celebrated at the highest levels of government. The thought should have felt like vindication, but instead it felt like evolution. I was moving beyond the need for their validation towards something far more meaningful: the opportunity to serve warriors who faced the same challenges I'd navigated, to build systems that supported military families dealing with civilian misunderstanding, to transform personal pain into public purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Reed. "Captain Mitchell, your quarters assignments and briefing schedules are attached. Welcome to Washington. The country is lucky to have you." As I read his message, Watching moonlight reflect off the Atlantic waters that had shaped my naval career, I realized that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something unprecedented in my life. For the first time, my military service and my family dynamics would exist on the same public stage, visible to millions of Americans who would draw their own conclusions about duty, sacrifice, and the price of serving something larger than yourself. My family would have to decide whether to embrace that visibility or continue their pattern of minimizing my achievements. But their decision would no longer determine my worth or limit my impact. I was Captain Mitchell now, soon to be Rear Admiral, with responsibilities that transcended family approval and opportunities that no amount of civilian discomfort could diminish. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, carrying away the last remnants of the daughter who had sought validation from people who couldn't provide it, leaving behind the officer who would now help other warriors find strength in service rather than approval from those who couldn't understand it. 5 years have passed since that Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony, and I now find myself in a place I never could have imagined during those early days at Table 15. The morning sun streams through the windows of my home office overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, the same waters that have witnessed my entire naval career from uncertain beginnings to unexpected heights. The Warrior Family Foundation has grown beyond anything we dreamed possible during those first conversations with Chief Torres on Virginia Beach. We now operate in 14 countries, helping military families navigate the complex relationships between service and civilian understanding. Our reconciliation programs have reunited over 50,000 families worldwide, and our advocacy efforts have changed military family support policies in nations across 5 continents. But today isn't about statistics or global impact. Today is about something far more personal and profound. Today marks the 10th anniversary of Jessica's wedding, and she has asked me to officiate at a renewal ceremony for her and David. Not because they need to renew their vows, but because they want to celebrate their marriage properly this time, with full acknowledgement of what military service means to their family. The ceremony will take place at the same venue where Admiral Reed first recognized my service, but everything else will be different. This time, my family has planned the event around honoring military service rather than hiding from. This time, my seat will be at the center of everything rather than hidden behind a pillar. I've just finished writing my remarks for the ceremony when the phone rang. The caller ID shows a number I recognize immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, my former teammate who now runs the Foundation's European operations. Admiral Mitchell, she says, using the rank I've carried for the past 3 years. I have news that couldn't wait for our scheduled briefing. Admiral, the rank I never allowed myself to dream of achieving, now part of my daily identity as Director of Global Military Family Initiative. The position carries responsibilities I'm still growing into, but it also provides platforms for impact that extend far beyond anything I could have accomplished as an individual service member. The NATO Council has approved our proposal for standardized military family support protocols across all member nations, Rodriguez continues, her excitement palpable even across the secure connection. They want to implement Foundation programming as the baseline standard for military family services throughout the alliance. The news represents years of careful diplomacy and program development, but more importantly, it means that military families facing civilian rejection will have support systems in place regardless of where they sit. No warrior will have to navigate family misunderstanding alone, and no family will have to struggle without resources for building bridges between service and civilian life. After ending the call, I walk out onto my deck overlooking the bay. The water stretches endlessly toward the horizon, carrying the same promise of adventure and purpose that first drew me to naval service, but now it also carries the satisfaction of work completed and purpose fulfilled in ways I never expected. My phone buzzes with a text from David. Sarah, would you mind arriving early today? Jessica wants to show you something special before the ceremony begins. The drive to the Grandview Country Club follows familiar roads through Virginia countryside, but everything feels different now. The same venues that once felt like battlegrounds for family acceptance have become places of celebration and connection. The same relationships that once required careful navigation now flow with genuine warmth and mutual respect. Jessica meets me in the bridal suite, radiant in a simple but elegant dress that reflects 10 years of marriage wisdom rather than first-time wedding dreams. Her smile carries the easy confidence of someone who has learned to value substance over appearance, purpose over perfection. "Thank you for agreeing to officiate," she says, embracing me with warmth that would have been impossible during our first wedding encounter. "Having you perform the ceremony means everything to us." "Thank you for asking. It's an honor I never expected to receive." Jessica leads me to a display table that takes my breath away. Arranged carefully across its surface are photographs chronicling the Foundation's work around the world: military families reunited after years of estrangement, civilian parents learning to embrace their service member children, spouses finding strength in military community connections, siblings discovering pride in their warrior family members. But the centerpiece of the display is something I've never seen before: a photograph from my original wedding recognition, taken by a guest and later shared with Jessica. In it, I'm standing at table 15 while Admiral Reed salutes, my expression calm and dignified despite the chaos surrounding me. Below the photograph, Jessica has placed a handwritten note: "To my sister Admiral Sarah Mitchell," it reads, "who transformed our family's greatest failure into her greatest triumph. Your grace under fire that day taught us all what honor actually looks like. Thank you for showing us that true strength comes from standing tall when others try to make you small." The display also includes letters from military families whose lives have been changed by Foundation work, each one bearing testimony to the ripple effects of that moment when Admiral Reed chose recognition over silence. What began as personal vindication has become global transformation, touching lives in ways that extend far beyond my own family's journey. "The Foundation's work," Jessica continues, "it all started with how badly we treated you. I wanted everyone here today to understand that your achievements didn't happen despite our family problems, but because you chose to transform our failures into something beautiful." Her words carry the weight of hard-won wisdom. Jessica has spent years working as the Foundation's legal counsel, using her corporate expertise to structure international partnerships and advocacy initiatives. The sister who once asked me to minimize my recognition now travels the world, helping other families embrace their military members' service. "There's something else," she says, opening an envelope with official government seals. "This arrived yesterday." The document inside bears the letterhead of the Secretary of Defense and formal language that makes my heart race even before I finish reading. It's notification of my appointment as the first director of the newly created International Military Family Institute, a position that will coordinate family support efforts across all allied nations, while maintaining my Foundation leadership role. The appointment represents the pinnacle of military family advocacy work, placing me at the center of global efforts to strengthen civilian-military relationships. More importantly, it validates the Foundation's approach and ensures that our programs will have permanent institutional support at the highest levels of international military cooperation. Though I suspect you've known about this for longer than the rest of us, the rumors have been circulating for months, but official confirmation is always different from speculation. Jessica nods, understanding the careful distinctions that govern military communication. Her years of Foundation work have taught her to navigate the precise language that shapes military culture and international diplomacy. The ceremony guests begin arriving as we finish reviewing the display and discussing the new appointment. Unlike the wedding 10 years ago, today's gathering includes active military personnel from every branch, Foundation staff members from around the world, and family friends who have learned to celebrate rather than merely tolerate military service. Admiral Reed, now retired but still carrying himself with the bearing that commands instant respect, approaches with his familiar combination of professional warmth and personal pride. "Admiral Mitchell, congratulations on your new appointment. The Institute position will allow you to expand Foundation principles on a scale we never imagined possible." "Thank you, sir. None of this would exist without your recognition that day." Admiral Reed's smile carries the satisfaction of a mentor watching his protege exceed all expectations. "That day, I simply honored what was already evident. Everything that followed was your choice to build something meaningful from difficult circumstances." The ceremony takes place on the same terrace where Admiral Reed first saluted my service, but the atmosphere is transformed by intention and understanding. Where the original wedding had hidden my military identity, Today's renewal celebrates it open. Military traditions blend seamlessly with civilian customs, creating something new and beautiful. As I stand before Jessica and David, speaking words about love, commitment, and the strength that comes from supporting each other's callings, I realize that this moment represents completion of a circle that began in pain and ends in purpose. The family that once asked me to hide my service now celebrates it publicly. The relationships that once required careful management now flow with authentic connection. Marriage, I tell the gathered guests, like military service, requires choosing something larger than individual comfort. It demands placing shared values above personal convenience, commitment above ease, love above fear. David's response to the renewal vows includes words that would have been impossible at their original wedding. Jessica, you have taught me that supporting your family means celebrating their achievements, not managing their inconvenience. Your growth in embracing your sister's service has shown me what genuine love looks like. Jessica's response brings tears to my eyes. David, you taught me that having a war hero in the family isn't a complication to be hidden, but an honor to be shared. Your respect for Sarah's service helped me discover pride I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The reception that follows includes toasts that acknowledge the journey our family has traveled together. Linda, now in her 70s but still elegant and determined, speaks about learning to celebrate what you don't understand and supporting what scares you. Her words carry the authority of someone who has undergone genuine transformation rather than superficial adjustment. Chief Torres, now Colonel Torres and the Foundation's Chief Operating Officer, offers remarks about the power of turning personal wounds into public service. His toast specifically acknowledges the ripple effects of family reconciliation, noting that healthy military families create stronger military units and more effective national defense. But it's the surprise guest who provides the ceremony's most meaningful moment. A young Navy SEAL lieutenant named Marcus Webb, whose family had rejected his military service until Foundation intervention helped rebuild their relationships, stands to offer unexpected testimony. 3 years ago, my parents asked me to choose between military service and family connection. He begins, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that marks special operations training. Admiral Mitchell's foundation helped them understand that they didn't have to choose, and they helped me find the strength to remain true to my calling, while keeping my heart open to family reconciliation. Lieutenant Webb's story echoes thousands of others that have emerged from Foundation work around the world, military personnel discovering that family rejection doesn't define their worth, civilian families learning that military service enhances rather than threatens family bonds, communities building bridges between military and civilian cultures that strengthen both. As the evening progresses toward its natural conclusion, I find myself standing again on the terrace overlooking Chesapeake Bay, but this time surrounded by people who understand and celebrate the choices that define my life. The isolation of Table 15 has been replaced by the warmth of chosen family expanded to include blood relatives, who learn to choose growth over comfort. Admiral Reed joins me at the railing, his presence carrying the same steady authority that marked our first meaningful encounter at this venue. Admiral, as I watch you tonight, I'm struck by something profound. You haven't just built a career or even an organization. You've created a new model for transforming personal adversity into public service. That's a legacy that will outlast any single assignment or recognition. His words capture something I've been sensing but haven't articulated. The Foundation's work represents more than military family advocacy. It demonstrates that personal pain, when channeled through purpose rather than bitterness, can become the foundation for healing that extends far beyond individual experience. The Institute appointment, I reply, it feels like the next logical step rather than a dramatic change. The principles remain the same, just applied on a broader scale. That's the mark of authentic leadership, Admiral Reed observes, when expanded responsibility feels like natural evolution, rather than overwhelming burden. As the last guest depart and the venue staff begin their efficient cleanup, my family gathers on the terrace for final photographs and private conversation. The easy warmth between us would have been impossible to imagine 10 years ago, but it feels completely natural now. Jessica and David express gratitude for the ceremony and excitement about my new appointment. Linda shares stories about Foundation donors, who have approached her wanting to increase their support after learning about our family's journey. The conversation flows without the careful navigation that once characterized our interactions. Driving home along familiar roads, through Virginia countryside, I reflect on the distance traveled between that first wedding reception and tonight's renewal ceremony. The physical location was the same, but everything meaningful had been transformed by choices made in response to difficulty rather than in avoidance of it. My phone rings as I pull into my driveway, Chief Torres calling with characteristic impeccable timing. "Admiral, how did the ceremony go?" "Perfectly." Jessica and David looked happy, the family dynamics were genuinely warm, and Admiral Reed gave his blessing for the Institute appointment. "Outstanding." "Ready for Monday morning?" "The NATO briefings are going to be intense, but the opportunity to standardize family support across alliance nations is game-changing." "Monday morning." Another chance to expand the Foundation's impact, to help military families around the world navigate the challenges that once seemed insurmountable in my own life. Another opportunity to transform personal experience into public service, individual healing into collective strength. "Ready," I confirm, though I suspect we'll be building the plane while flying it for the first few months. Wouldn't be the first time. That's what makes the work interesting. After ending the call, I stand on my deck overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, where my naval career began and where it continues to evolve in directions I never anticipated. The water stretches dark and infinite under the night sky, carrying the same promise of adventure and purpose that first called me to serve it. Tomorrow, I'll begin work as director of the International Military Family Institute, expanding Foundation principles across allied nations, and building support systems for military families facing challenges that transcend national boundaries. The personal pain that once felt like abandonment will continue its transformation into global healing. Tonight I'll sleep peacefully knowing that the family that once asked me to hide my achievements now celebrates them publicly, that the relationships that once required careful management now flow with genuine affection, and that the service that once divided us has become the foundation for connection deeper than anything we previously shared. Some stories end with resolution, some end with some end with forgiveness. Mine ends with purpose fulfilled and expansion ahead, personal healing transformed into public service, individual strength becoming collective power. The daughter who was hidden at table 15 became the admiral whose work strengthens military families around the world. The pain of family rejection became the foundation for helping thousands of families choose connection over conflict. The recognition that began with one man's salute has become a global movement, transforming how nations support their military family. Looking out over the dark waters that shaped my career and continue to inspire my service, I understand that some journeys end exactly where they need to be, even when the destination was never the one originally planned. The greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from transforming their limitations into your strength, their failures into your purpose, their rejection into your calling to help others find acceptance. The bay stretches endlessly toward tomorrow, carrying the promise of continued service, expanded impact, and the satisfaction that comes from choosing honor over comfort, duty over approval, purpose over personal ease. Some battles are won by fight, others are won by building something beautiful from the ground they tried to deny you. Mine was always meant to be the second kind. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.